Thank you for that, Mark. Oh, we're recording now. Good. So I think before we kick off, there's a functionality on your menu that's called question and answer. So if you've got any questions through this, please just drop the question in there, and we've devoted some time at the end to just answer some questions that anyone has left. Today's session should last maybe 45, 50 minutes, so we should finish just before the hour, and we'll just kick off now. So today's agenda, what we wanted to start with was really just a section on the big question, is TA still relevant? And really just some discussion between myself and Mark and some research that we've done in that topic. Then we'll look at where do we stand in 2025? What is the state of talent acquisition at the moment? We then gave three key takeaways as part of the registration to this session. The first being, can TA be the human AI translator? The second being, how do we tie talent to business outcomes? And the third being, how do we start small and prove it and get some of the momentum that we start to talk about in today's session? Then what we'll do, we're doing a live self-assessment towards the end of this webinar that really gives you the chance to self-evaluate yourself and your TA team to really, I guess, assess how future ready is your function. And we'll do some scoring and questions towards that at the end of the webinar. And then lastly, we'll finish with some final thoughts and obviously time for you to ask any questions that you have. So as we jump into, is TA still relevant? From my point of view, why are we asking this now? I think, first of all, I think if we were to have asked this 5 years ago, it would have sounded ridiculous. But I think the reality is, that we're seeing what we're calling a perfect storm, that there's a lot of evolution of AI, of automation, and that is really changing the TA landscape. Secondly, from my perspective, the clients that we work with, the prospects that we speak to, businesses are becoming obsessed with agility, outcomes, and performance. And lastly, we see a lot of research, as well as speaking to our own customers, that CHROs continue to feel under pressure, not just to perform, but to transform. And they're asking more of their people function, in particular TA. So for me, the question isn't just, is TA evolving? It's more, is it evolving fast enough to stay relevant in today's environment? We wanted to give you some data to back that thought process up. So the first being, and this is from a CHRO Insights report that I can share after the call, but the first being, AI is very much here now and not tomorrow. So of that report that I'll reference in a moment, I think it was sent to around 800 HR and TA leaders, and 0% said that they felt their team was fully prepared for what was coming from an AI point of view. Now, you could argue no one is fully prepared for what's coming from an AI point of view, but still quite an alarming stat. Also, only 5% of HR teams felt ready to adopt AI effectively. And my view is TA really has to step in now to a more tech-enabled advisory role to avoid becoming irrelevant in the future. The second point to back that up was really around talent strategy gaps are widening. So from the same research, 48% of CHROs didn't know how to get the skills they needed through hiring or reskilling. And from my point of view, I see that as a real TA opportunity for TA to own, or else someone else will potentially take it. Thirdly, backing the evolution of TA, we talked about short-term thinking is potentially undermining the talent function. What do I mean by that? 35% of CHROs felt their organizations were too focused on short-term growth at the expense of long-term talent. And I think our viewpoint is if TA can't connect to that long-term capability, then ultimately business leaders can find, an alternative solution to do so. And then lastly, our view is that from the data, TA is still measured on what I would call outdated metrics. So a lot of organizations are still talking about time to hire, cost per hire, number of hires, rather than productivity, retention, impact. And I really think that's a real performance disconnect. And I think it becomes part of today's problem as we talk through. What Mark and I have done in preparation for today's session is just do quite a bit of research into the evolution of talent acquisition. And we broke that into what we're calling 5 generations, which we'll reference as we go through the webinar. The first generation that we classified as recruitment admin, we could see that evolving from the early 90s to the early 2000s. And that was really an organization that was most focused on processing CVs, running ads, the logistics of the hiring process. It was operationally robust, it was compliant, but it almost was perceived as low value and very much back office. We then have seen the evolution between 2005 to 2015 that we're calling the formation of the talent acquisition function. And we see that historically was focused on proactive sourcing, developing EVP, and also building out internal TA teams, evolving to Generation 3 between 2015 and 2022 that we're calling the Strategic Talent Partner, that really started to dig into workforce planning, analytics, implementing some TA tech, and also maturing the thought process on EVP. And I think we're now in what we're calling Generation 4 between 2023 to next year, 2026, that is more focused on how do we embed AI into the TA function? How do we start to think about skills-based hiring? And also, how are we aligning what we are doing to business value? I think the strength of the current model is there's more of an advisory mindset, there is more of a skills-first hiring, and more of an organizational design input. But the limitations, I think, are few teams have fully adopted what we're calling Gen 4. And I think this is where TABO, what we're calling talent acquisition becoming obsolete, starts to show some risk. What we're seeing over the next couple of years between 2027 to 2035 is what we're called Generation 5, which is really more focused on workforce architecture, business performance partnering. And that focus starts to shift to how is the TA function orchestrating true workforce design, performance-linked hiring, and also real-time hiring insights. So if I was to summarize this, I would say if Gen 1 was about filling jobs and Gen 3 was about advising HR, then Gen 5 is very much about advising the business in real time, not only on who and why we should hire, but also how fast they should join the organization. And for me, it's about shifting it from not just being about recruitment, but about being about, truly workforce design. I think I'll summarize by saying, what do we see that Generation 5, how do we see it being different to the other generations? Firstly, very outcome focused. So for us, it's around TA isn't measured anymore by traditional metrics. It's really measured by the true business impact of the hires that are being made. Secondly, a generation of TA that is more AI fluent and human led, that's using predictive modeling, scenario planning, behavioral science to really advise the business on hiring decisions. What we're calling business integrated. So, I think historically T has been very much within HR, but we see that evolving to being an absolute peer to sales ops, transformation, FP&A, and more of an always on talent planning mindset. So that building of talent pipeline is continuous and it's not triggered by requisitions. And lastly, we see it moving from not just filling roles, but very much to workforce shaping, as we're calling it, where TA really helps decide on not only what to hire, but when to hire, and also what to automate as part of that process. So what's the issue? Before I pass over to Mark, what's the issue? I think the issue is that, the promise of Generation 5 sounds really appealing, that TA becomes more outcome focused, business integrated, more AI fluent. And really, for me, that's where TA starts to become that true workforce performance partner. But I think the challenge that we're seeing across the sector we operate is you can't skip the hard work of the current generation of TA. And in fact, the challenge is many TA organizations or functions are a bit stuck at the moment. They want the promised land of what we're calling Gen 5, but they're currently running or operating maybe Gen 2 or Gen 3, teams and functions. So we talk about talent acquisition becoming obsolete because my view is too many TA functions are maybe trying to take that leap from rep filling to business strategy. They're trying to skip the sourcing to become more scenario planning focused. And they're almost trying to go straight to talent design without truly embedding what we're calling the true talent intelligence. And I think that's where the potential gap or risk of irrelevance comes that we talk about, is talent acquisition becoming irrelevant? Mark, over to you. What's your thoughts generally on what we've discussed so far and how it fits into this?
Well, I was just thinking about our chat before everyone joined us a minute ago, and I'm old enough to be remembering the generation 1 of recruitment, and working in the supplier side, joining an organisation that gave me a a phone and a very small Rolodex of contacts and a Dun and Bradstreet, and it was pretty much off you go and do things. And you had to, as I said, post CVs, fax CVs. It was a very, very labour intensive job, and it's become less so over my sort of 20 plus years. But I think with the advent of AI, AI is giving us an opportunity to take away all of those really onerous tasks that made recruitment a very labour intensive job. So if you're thinking about obviously the scheduling of interviewing, creating of job specification descriptions, even screening CVs, a lot of that AI can do in that heavy lift. So it feels like we're at a really important moment for HR and TA that sits within that, because they've got an opportunity, I think, to become real true to your words, talent advisors to the business, to move away from seeing their role as filling seats, to actually providing real value and insight for the business to make better decisions. So one of the things that we talk about at Thomas is how we see HR and TA having an opportunity with AI to actually really own that space for an organization. And I think because of that, this is also an opportunity for HR and the functions within it to really get a seat at the exec table or become more business critical, which is something that they've often struggled with. You know, you'll often talk to people in HR and TA, and they feel as if they're perceived as more of a cost center rather than a value-driven center or business-critical center. So, yeah, I think it's exciting, but at the same time, I can understand that there's a lot of uncertainty still. On this, one of the things on this slide, I just want to draw people's attention to, and I think we talk a lot about skills first mindset and skills first hiring, and that's a key focus area for a lot of organizations. But I think often as TA, we don't define what we mean by skills accurately enough. A skill is often seen when you actually ask a business as a piece of experience or something that somebody has done before. And at Thomas, we like to think about skills in a soft skills context, and we talk about characteristics. And I think actually to be a talent advisor in a business, you've got to be able to understand the real behaviors and the personality of an individual and why they're going to be successful in an organization. Because when you actually look at it, 89% of failed hires fail because of a lack of soft skills, not what they've done in the past or what they've done on their CV. So yeah, I think that's really important. I think we need to shift how we view skills and how we determine and define it, to really think about someone's motivations, their behavior, their personality, and why they'll be successful. And I think the last thing to your point here is understanding the talent you've got in the business. You need to see inside before you plan outside. So often we talk to organizations and they'll be wanting to try and recruit the right talent because they feel as if they've been making the wrong decisions, but they've not really understood what talent they've got inside the business and what actually is making people successful inside the organization. What is it that actually makes them successful in their particular roles? And this is where we've got an opportunity for talent acquisition to really understand what's going on inside the business beyond, as you've mentioned there in the opening, Gavin, filling seats and filling roles.
Good. Excellent. Super. We're going to pause for a moment. The next slide is just an opportunity to get your feedback. So if you want to, please scan the QR code, and it's just a live question. But the question is really, how future ready is your TA function today? And there's four options. One, we're stuck in traditional transactional delivery. Two, we're evolving but inconsistent. Three, we're mostly modernized, still with some gaps. Or four, we're already aligned with the future Gen 4, Gen 5 thinking that we're talking about on this session. So just to take a moment, and if you could complete that, if you're able to, that would be great. So far, quite a few have said we're evolving but inconsistent. So let's see if anyone else wants to jump in. I'll hold for another 10 seconds or so, then we'll move on.
Oh,
Another one jumping in.
oh, okay.
Which again, maybe talks to what we've discussed already, where I think a lot of TA functions really do want to get to that Gen 5 thinking or Gen 5, operating, but are maybe stuck in the what we're calling Gen 2, Gen 3, which is more transactional, traditional delivery. I think the other key thing to say at this point is, as much as Gen 5 is where I think TA needs to be, it's also dependent on the business that you work for, i.e., do they want a Gen 5 TA organization, are they willing to adopt that? So that could also be some of the challenges that we'll talk through later.
Do those, Gavin, did they surprise you, those results? The
Um,
89%, is that higher than you were expecting?
Probably higher than I was expecting. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think the fact that so far we've not had anyone that's saying we're mostly modernized with some gaps or we're fully aligned, really talks to the topic, is talent acquisition becoming obsolete? Because my concern is if continues to be in the we're evolving but inconsistent, or we're stuck in traditional transactional delivery, then that's probably more of a challenge as they move forward. So I'd say, the scale of the answers are surprising, Mark, but probably not the trend.
Yeah. And I wonder if by inconsistent, that's the issue around the disconnect between TA and HR and line managers. And, because one of the things that we often talk to is you'll get pockets of managers that will want to do things differently, and then you've got others that the HR and the TA functions are trying to drag into the new ways of working, and they're stuck. They're stuck in this is how we've always done things around here.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's still that disconnect in certain organisations in terms of they've got some line managers that are willing to work and move with the new ways, but some are still stuck in the old ways of doing things.
And again,
Perhaps.
before we move on, because this is relevant now to the next section, I talk a lot about hiring being a team sport. So, there's more than one side to the hiring, process. And secondly, we all talk about active and passive candidates, but we don't talk as much about active and passive hiring managers. And to your point, Mark, I do think, the more active a hiring manager is, the more future ready TA can also be, in that organization. So let's move on. I think the next piece is really around where we stand now. So the state of TA in 2025 from our research. And Mark, I'll pass this one over to you.
Okay, so I mean, just coming on from what you've just said about active and passive. So I think one of the ways that we can move things forward, and I think one of the ways that is perhaps holding talent acquisition back, is that we've got active and passive talent acquisition. So passive talent acquisition, I think, is waiting for the job requisition to come through from the line manager, and it's that classic case of somebody's resigned, they weren't expecting it, and then recruitment suddenly becomes a real key issue. The line manager's under pressure to hire. A job specification gets given to TA. It's looking for a purple unicorn. They need someone to hit the ground running, and then the TA department and HR are on the back foot trying to find that candidate that they probably think doesn't exist, and there's pressure, and they're working very much in a passive way. And I think a lot of talent acquisition, a lot of recruitment is done like that. It's very, very reactive. But then if you're taking more of an active role, it's understanding, right, where are the key roles in the business,
Yeah.
and what would happen if that person was to leave? Who have we got coming through that could step up, and what are we doing to develop talent in our pipelines to mitigate that so that we're not on the back foot? So I think there is an opportunity here to think about how you can become more active versus passive, and break that sort of vicious cycle that, from my perspective, has always existed in recruitment and talent acquisition. And one of the and again, to your point as well, Gavin, the TA function and talent management needs to work as a team. It's a team sport, to your point, and everybody needs to understand that the talent inside the business is everybody's responsibility. The things you can do to help you here, one of the things that we work with organisations a lot on is benchmarking. So that is to understand who've they got, what does good look like, what are the behaviours, the personality traits that make people successful inside the organisation, and it helps them understand the talent they've got inside the business, but it also helps them understand the talent they need to recruit when something does go wrong and someone leaves. It helps them understand, right, what are the soft skills that someone needs to have to be successful in the organisation, which again means that they're less reliant on trying to find someone that is a square peg and fitting them into a square hole. So that's my view in terms of what I think is holding us back, but I also see it as an opportunity for talent acquisition as well.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Which leads into that. I mean, I think we've talked about the gaps, but we also want to acknowledge in today's environment there are real strengths. And I think the first one that we pick up on here is great TA professionals already spend a lot of time influencing through the process, whether it's persuading candidates, negotiating offers, managing stakeholders. So those skills and that ability to influence, I think, can really align to how they can support shaping that business strategy. Secondly, we see it externally, but even more so internally. TA teams are very close to what we're calling market signals. So they are usually one of the first functions that sees any shifts in salary, inflation levels, skill shortages, candidate expectation, talent availability. And I think that's real intelligence that TA can bring to the business needs. Thirdly, it's a function that's already investing in tools and technology. So, they're already starting to think about what is our tech stack, what do we need to be using, not using, etc. And I think the work is really around how do you adopt that technology, but also use it for the business impact rather than just the TA impact. Global networks, to your point, external benchmarking. So again, TA teams are often strong at benchmarking in comparison to HR and L&D. They're doing it more as part of their day-to-day job and can also offer valuable insights into hiring decisions around capability, what else what is available externally versus internally, etc. And also what we're calling a renewed focus from C-suite. So I think it's clear from our clients and people that we speak to that C-level leaders are starting to recognize that talent is an HR issue, it's a P&L issue. And the right TA functions can really be well positioned to adopt and take advantage of this HR to P&L issue swing. So I think if we move on then, if we start focusing on the key takeaways, and then at the end of this, we'll do the self-assessment audit on is your function, becoming obsolete or is it ready for the future? I think the first key takeaway that we talked about was being the human and AI translator. And I'm going to do a few did you know stats, and then I'll pass on to Mark to talk about it in a bit more detail. So the first one, and again, this is from the report that I referenced earlier, talking about adoption versus readiness. So from that report, only 42% of CHROs are talking about prioritizing AI investment, but only 5% of HR teams feel well prepared to adopt it. And again, I'll mention it as I mentioned at the start, 0% of that 800 HR TA leaders say they are fully prepared, for the AI impact. If we then look at the impact that AI can have in boosting employee engagement, if it's done correct. So our research would show that when employees feel really trained, specifically in AI, that discretionary effort can go up by just under 200%. And also of the 60% of the people in the survey that were deemed as employees said that they would actually prefer to stay in a job, even if they marginally disliked it, if that job was providing them rapid upskilling in AI. So I think it really starts to show the importance of not only AI as an efficiency tool, but also as an engagement tool. I think there are still for sure bias and trust issues and barriers. 40% of TA professionals worry that AI makes the hiring process feel more impersonal, which is an absolute concern. And 25% of those cite that the algorithmic bias is a real key concern. However, candidates are already fast, adopting AI, with 65% saying they're now using AI to write CVs, prep for interviews, do mock interview questions, et cetera, et cetera. So really just wanted to set the landscape before Mark jumps in to talk a little bit more in detail.
Thanks, Gavin. Yeah. So, Thomas is a business that's really embraced AI in terms of our solutions. So we're a traditional, or have been a traditional people science psychometric company that now is using AI and technology to really get and leverage the insights to help people work more effectively on a one-to-one and on a teams basis. So, for me, I see AI as the real opportunity, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think HR has got the opportunity to own AI inside the business. I think this is our moment to embrace it. But by the same token, as Gavin's just mentioned, there are some things that are a concern to people, and I think you've got issues in America with lawsuits with Workday that have highlighted certain issues around AI. But nonetheless, I think this is still the opportunity for HR to really embrace AI, and as I say, elevate themselves to become more of a seat at the exec table. And I use AI myself, not just within Thomas in its own solutions, but also I use AI in my day-to-day job to help me as a job aid. So I think really I would encourage everybody listening and watching that you should really embrace it. It's not going to go away. I think it's there to support. I think you can use it to support all those parts of your job that have traditionally taken up a lot of time, and it can help you become more of a talent advisor to the business. So again, as Gavin mentioned at the start of the webinar, this is about how you can use technology and how you can use what's available now to become more of a strategic talent advisor to a business, because AI can do a lot for you there in terms of supporting those conversations with line managers and the wider stakeholders. I see AI is really it's something that helps me make decisions. It's something I bounce ideas off. It can help to reduce some of those bias situations and help support conversations that you might be having. So a really common example and scenario could be, even if you're not working in an organization with sophisticated AI inside your HR platform or ATS, you can use an AI tool to help support a application and a candidate that you think is really, really strong, to help support the argument when you're getting pushback from a line manager who's looked at a CV and looked at an application and thought, no, I don't think this person's right. You can use it to help support your own point of view and case. So AI should be the human translator. I think it should be used to free up more time to do the real parts of talent acquisition, which is the human to human bit, and making sense of the data and making sense of the person and making sense of the information for the business.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mark. So we'll pause for a second. Second question as part of the poll. And the question is really around, how confident are you that your team understands the role of AI in hiring? And again, 4 options: not confident, it feels like a black box; somewhat, we're exploring use cases; quite confident, we're piloting tools and training; or very confident, and we're really actively leading AI within the organization. So again, I'll just take a moment here just to get a feel for what people are thinking that are attending. So the majority picking the first 2, which was not confident was the least, and then somewhat we're exploring use cases. So far, no one's saying quite confident, we're piloting tools or training, or no one's saying very confident. And again, to your point earlier, Mark, the extent of the answers probably surprised me a little. I mean, I expected most people to be saying, somewhat confident, maybe quite confident. I don't think many are saying I'm very confident and we're doing everything we can. from an AI point of view. But I think these answers probably tie into, what are we doing to evolve TA to make it, that future ready organization. Good. I'll take one more moment and then we'll move on. Okay. So last couple of slides before we do the self-assessment piece and allow you to evaluate your TA team and function against some benchmarks. So I think the second key takeaway from today's session was around how do we tie talent to business outcomes? And again, I'll maybe give some of the data and Mark will then, follow up. So the first one is, there is from the data that we look at, there is definitely a disconnect between talent and strategy. So for example, a lot of CHROs are saying their organization is too focused on short-term growth at the expense of long-term talent needs. Also, over a third of CHROs are saying there's not enough planning for the future. And to your point earlier, Mark, hiring and workforce planning is more reactive than strategic. Now, again, I know in a tougher economic climate, it's definitely more difficult to be strategic. It's more around the here and now. But I think as we look forward, that is still a bit of a concern. In parallel, though, CEOs absolutely want talent that can drive growth. So two-thirds of CHROs feel they know the skills that's needed for future growth, but only 48% actually know how to get them. And my feeling here is the gap is the opportunity, that I think TA can be that missing link between what we'll call, internal capability and then also external commercial performance. And lastly, we've alluded to this, but I think our view is that a lot of talent metrics often miss the true business impact. So we've talked about the historic ones, but I look at across our client base, and maybe only 20% are focused on what we're calling TA business impact metrics. So time to productivity, ramp speed, impact in team engagement, impact in revenue, the quality of hire metrics, if you will. And I think, Mark, just to kind of pick up on that, how do you see that shift of the old mindset to the new business aligned mindset?
Yeah, I mean, just reflecting on some of those statistics, and I think it it kind of matches what we've been saying. Not wanting to use too much confirmation bias, Gavin, but
Yeah.
you know, it's, it's that classic case of people talking about skills, but I think just defining them in the context of their own industry. When they talk about there's not enough talent, that the skills aren't out there, they're often talking about what people have done before, what's on their CV. They're talking about hard, what we call classic hard skills, and not actually what will make someone successful in a job, which is the thing that isn't on their CV. It's the soft skills. It's the things that you can't necessarily read on a piece of paper, and it's that disconnect, and we need to use this opportunity now, I think, to try and bring those two together, to challenge line managers when they are asking for something that we know is just not out there and does not exist. So I think tying TA to business outcomes is very much about the shift of mindset, as we've spoken about. It's moving away from my job is to fill that particular role in as quickly and cost-effective time as possible to a new way of thinking and a new way of working. And I think if TA can think about their job as not stopping when the candidate starts, that would be a really helpful point, because just because someone starts on day one does not mean you've successfully hired. If we think about onboarding, we think about even pre-boarding, but before the candidate even starts on day one, onboarding, everything they do in the first 12 months, I think is part of TA's role to really make sure they're successful. I think time to productivity should be measured. And it's amazing when I talk to TA people and HR people, how often they don't know what the speed of productivity is. They might not know how many people pass probation, whether that's 3 months, 6 months. So I think those are the things that you need to be focused on, not necessarily time to hire. It's the revenue impact of critical hires as well, not numbers of roles being filled, but how much revenue are they bringing in, and how are you measuring that? So it's a shift from the old school metrics of effectiveness to things that the business actually care about, and making yourself um, a value driver, someone that is business critical to the organisation's success.
And I think then building on that, you're going to talk a little bit more about how do TA add value beyond the hire. So, some of the areas where, that value can really kick in.
Yeah, so you've got impact dashboards, so you can start looking at various different measures in terms of impact. So retention, ramp speed, team performance.
Yep.
Try to partner with finance and strategy. So again, this is about getting outside of the TA and HR bubble and actually speak to people in finance, speak to people that are maybe speaking the language of the business to align what you're trying to achieve as a TA function
Mhm.
with the actual business objectives and the strategic objectives of the organization.
Yep.
I probably don't have enough conversations with professionals in TA or HR where they're aware enough of what the strategic objectives of the organization are. So it comes back to that point that we were talking about earlier with, are you active or passive? So often when I ask questions around, okay, what's the reason you need to hire better people? What's the reason you need to do X, Y? How does it link into the CEO or the CFO's objectives or strategy, the overall business impact that it's going to have? There's not enough information coming back, and they often have to go out and find that information. And I think, again, we should be more curious in other parts of the business to say, right, okay, what does the other parts of the business care about? What language do they speak that I can then speak to get my initiatives through and to actually make an impact? You can influence workforce design. So again, we've started working with a lot of organizations in the last 12 months that are making this shift to workforce design, workforce planning, using our tools and insights to really understand, right, what does good look like in the organization? Who do we have to move into different roles? What can we do with people? And how can we align their characteristics, their behavior, their personality? What have they got as their raw intrinsic traits, their aptitude that we can then reskill and rehire? How can we move them up in time of the organization? And own time to impact. So as we've spoken about, don't just see your role as the candidates started. I've got them their information for day one. They know where they need to turn up and where they need to go. That's it. I'm off to the next position I need to fill. I think there's an opportunity here to understand that your time to impact, the onboarding, the measurement of success, how many people perhaps you move into the business that actually then get promoted into other roles are more impactful measures for the organization. And then we've got skills audits and guide to L&D and internal mobility. So how can you actually look at capability reviews in conjunction with L&D? How often are you speaking? Are you working as a team? So again, I often get or have conversations with TA and L&D are working in silos. So try and break out of those silos and work more in a joined up fashion.
Excellent. Super. And then the last key takeaway before we go to the self-assessment audit, the last key takeaway was all around just starting small, improving it. So, trying to make sure that you don't, bite off too big a project or an opportunity, but just start to get some momentum, in the evolution of TA. So I think our view is that, don't wait. So I think, again, from our research, 70% of CHROs are saying their HR analytics maturity is still pretty basic. And in actual fact, most teams aren't yet using that data for what we would call strategic decisions. So I think the good news is you're not behind if you feel like that. You're in the majority. But that's why, for me, small wins, matter most. And I think our view on that small wins is really all around agility. So again, looking at the data, a lot of CHROs are saying, how do I build agility into the operating model? And in fact, it's very much a 2025 this year priority. What does that mean? That means that agility to give HR and TA functions a better opportunity to pilot things faster, to be more flexible in experiments, and also for faster iteration. So I really think that starting small, improving it is a good way to build momentum. And last piece before the audit, Mark, your thoughts on what's some actions that allows TA teams to build that momentum?
Yeah, so I think as we talked about, you need to try and track time to productivity. We need to understand the retention during probation, the quality of the hire, not just the speed. So I think one of the key things that we should take away from today is that. Pilot skills based hiring, so you can design work on one role using not just what someone's done in the past as a criteria, but actually what those skills are, what those soft skills are, the behavior, the personality, the type of things that are going to make them successful. Trial that with a particular role and a particular line manager that is really open to perhaps doing things differently. Go above and beyond the value of what's on someone's CV. You can look at recent hires and get interviews from them in terms of how they found the experience. What we're calling here the post-hire impact survey. How did they actually? How would they appraise their experience of how they've been hired and onboarded into the organisation? I think AI fluency. From the poll results, there's clearly a lot of reticence around using AI. The fact that you still see it as a black box. Well, I think the only way that you can actually break out of that is to embrace it and start using it in your day to day. Most of these tools are free, so you can use any version of any AI to actually embed it in what you're doing from a work perspective, and start using it in particular sessions with both TA and L&D. And I think the final thing, and this is probably the most important one from my vantage point, is if you're in a silo, break out and really start working collaboratively with L&D functions. As I've mentioned, it surprises me how often I speak to organizations whereby TA and L&D are speaking in silos. The organizations that are getting these things right, I can guarantee you, are the ones where TA and L&D are joined up. And to your point, Gavin, I love the phrase talent acquisition, or talent is a team sport. So I think I can't emphasize that enough.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Mark. Okay, so last 5 minutes is really an opportunity for the attendees to really just audit themselves. And what Mark and I have done is built a very simple audit that's really based on 6 key pillars. If we summarize what we've talked about so far, we've given a bit of information on the different generations of TA, where we're at just now, which we're calling Gen 4, where we want to be, which is Gen 5. And we've built the audit around 6 pillars. First one is strategy integration. So how aligned is TA to the business strategy? Tech and AI readiness, again, self-explanatory. Data-driven insights, how are TA really leveraging data to make decisions? Candidate experience and EVP alignment, what we're then calling talent agility focused, so that ability to shift from job-based to skill-based hiring. And then lastly, the TA capability that you have, as well as that truly advisory role. Each section has got 4 questions, and what we're going to do is just put each section up and give you a couple of moments to just score yourself against these. So you don't need to, there's no polls. It's really just an opportunity for you to read the 4 questions, and the scoring is out of 4, with 1 being the lowest, 1 being I'm not at all doing this, I've never done it, I'm unaware, 2 being I sometimes do it or I do it inconsistently or we're at an early stage, scoring of 3 being I mostly do this or we've partially done this, and then score of 4 being yeah, we're absolutely doing this as a standard practice. So I'll just take a moment if you just want to read the 4 questions and then just mark yourself out of 16 in terms of that first pillar, which is all around strategy integration. How aligned is TA to the business strategy? And we'll just do this very quickly for the 6 pillars. And if you just keep a note of your scores each section, then we'll do a kind of self-assessment at the end of this. Okay, so I'm going to move into pillar 2 in a moment, just so everyone's aware. And again, we'll follow the same pattern, 4 questions, scoring out of 4. Pillar 2 is tech and AI readiness. So how effectively is technology and AI integrated into the TA function? We've got 4 questions, and again, just self-score yourself out of 4 for each of those questions. Moving on to pillar 3 in a moment. Okay, pillar 3 is focused on data-driven insights. So is TA really leveraging data for impact and decision making? And again, you can see the 4 questions that you can answer out of 4. And then giving yourself a total out of 16. We're bang on time here, Mark. A couple of more minutes and then we're bang on time. So
That's good. As long as I don't get told off for talking too much, Gavin.
no, not at all. Good. Moving on to pillar 4 in a moment. So pillar 4 is all around the candidate experience and EVP alignment. So does the hiring experience really reflect your brand, and does it help you retain top talent? Again, 4 questions, scored out of 4 with a total out of 60. And I will say, if you are interested in this audit, we can send a copy to you afterwards as well. But this is purely just for your benefit at the moment. Moving on to the second last pillar, pillar 5, which is all around talent agility focus. So are you building for skills, not just roles? And also, are you enabling internal mobility? Here are the 4 questions. And then lastly, pillar 6, which is all around TA capability and the advisory element to the role. So are your TA teams acting as true strategic advisors and not order takers? And then we'll move on to some ranking and scoring. Okay, so the results. So there was a total possible score of 96, which was the 6 pillars, the 4 questions, and the four points. So from our point of view, we believe that if you've scored yourself somewhere between 0 and 40, there's definitely a higher risk of your function maybe not progressing as quickly, as the organization or the future demands it to do so. If you scored between 41 and 64, our view is that you're partially ready to embrace TA evolving to what we talked about earlier in the session. Moving to 65 to 80, that there's definitely good progress, but some gaps remain. And then lastly, if you're anywhere between 81 and 96 as a score, we believe that you are fully future ready. You're in Gen 4, you're progressing to Gen 5, and you're really making that business impact from a TA point of view. And again, as I've said, if you want any more information on this after the session, then just reach out. So my last poll before we summarize today's session, really relating to those 6 pillars, my question is, which pillar of the audit do you feel you need to prioritize first to help you future-proof your TA function? So if everyone could just take a moment and complete that, that would be great. Okay, there's a few answers coming in. Which I guess isn't a surprise because in an earlier poll, there was obviously a lot about are we, AI ready? So that being one of the top is probably ties into that talent agility. So the shift from skills first and enabling internal mobility. Interesting. No one's yet picked candidate experience, so that's a good thing. That hopefully means that candidate experience is strong in your organization. Maybe any other answers before we summarize? Okay, we'll move on. So I think Mark and I's final thoughts before we've got a couple of questions that we'll address, but some final thoughts before we do that. The first, our view is that talent acquisition isn't becoming obsolete. So even though we put that challenging statement out to say, TABO is talent acquisition becoming obsolete, our view is that it isn't. But our view is that traditional TA, absolutely is. We've talked about it today. TA has to evolve from the rec filling, function and team to a more data informed, business aligned function. The future for us of TA is very much human led and AI fluent, and the ability to translate that into true business value. And then also to stay relevant, I think Mark talked about it a lot through the session, is really linking the hiring to the outcome and ensuring that the hires that you're making as a TA team are truly adding value to the business, they're productive, they're capable, and ultimately, you're retaining that talent. I think going back to, start small and scale, you don't need permission to start. So small pilots, small things, fast wins really can help build that TA credibility and momentum. And then lastly, feel free to use the audit that we talked through to almost self-evaluate every quarter, every 6 months on, where are we standing now against the questions? Where's our next level of focus? Because we certainly feel that audit is a good self-assessment of, I guess a baseline on where are we now versus where do we want to be as a function. Any final thoughts from you, Mark?
No, thank you, Gavin, and thanks for your input today in the sum up. I just feel that this is a huge opportunity for HR and talent acquisition. I understand the uncertainty that many people have, but I think, for me, talent acquisition is not about putting a square peg in a square hole. It's about identifying those people that on paper might not necessarily have everything, but actually are real quality individuals that can be huge assets to an organization. And I think this is an opportunity now to really become true talent advisors in an organization and to change the way that the role and the function is perceived.
Excellent. We've got a couple of questions, and I think we've got time for maybe a couple. So first one was from someone, which of the 6 pillars do you see as the biggest blind spot across organizations today? And I think, it's certainly that, for me, probably that talent agility of moving from hiring for jobs versus hiring for skills. And then also the evaluation of what is the TA capability internally. I think to Mark's point earlier, I don't think enough TA teams that we speak to are really pushing themselves on the business. They're almost waiting for the business to come to them. So I think that, capability piece and aligning to the business is key. Mark, any final thoughts from your side?
No, I probably agree with that, Gavin. Yeah, I think like we say, it's, the biggest challenge is often the biggest opportunity, isn't it? So it's like strengths and weaknesses. So I'd agree with you there. I think that's the strongest one to try and solve for.
Good. And then one time for one final question. Someone has said, do you think the shift of outcome focused TA is universal, or does it depend on region, industry, and company maturity? And that's a good question. I think it does depend on company maturity. I think my point earlier around this is two things. It's about how good is TA, but how willing are the business to accept Gen 4, Gen 5 TA. And I think from an AI point of view, I think there are, size of company and region that then start to adopt that quicker and better. Any thoughts from your side, Mark?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're a global company, so I don't necessarily think there's any different outside the UK. I think to your point though, yeah, size of business. a lot of what we've talked about here, I'm really conscious of, is a lot easier to execute with
Totally.
a smaller business with less complexity. So
Yep.
I recognise the challenge that the bigger the organisation, the more difficult some of this stuff becomes. Type of industry, again, we deal with pretty much every single vertical market you can care to mention. I don't necessarily think there's much of a difference, but yeah, company size probably.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Super. So that is us finished. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming to the session. We will tomorrow follow up with a key takeaway document that summarizes what we've discussed. But if there's any particular questions that you have or you want to know more about the audit, etc., that we've talked through, feel free to reach out. Thanks again for everyone's time.